no problem for me because I've lived in Oklahoma for so long. But
Yeah.
yeah. So we are on the tail end of all these ESHIP goal calls until the next iteration of what they look like.
Where are we with what they're going to look like?
I don't know. This will be. That's for you and the rest of the ESHIP champions to help figure out.
You're just into this
Oh.
sort of plausible deniability thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm busted. I think there's currently 4 streams, right, Beth, that we talked about? So there's goal project stuff. There's an intro onboarding call for people that are new to the community, and a talk about overlaps across goals. There's deep dive learning stuff, which is where we get speakers or topics. And then there's one that's just kind of a community hangout kind of thing for social aspects. So those are the 4 that we've identified. Hi, Michael. So trying to figure out what the new cadence of calls look like post-summit for the next couple of months. And the only things that the team and the foundation have to figure out what this looks like going into the following year. So that's where we're at. How does that sound, Peter?
I don't know what I'm going to do with my weekdays. I'll tell you.
I think that there's plenty to keep you busy for your weekdays. I don't know, we'll invite, we see the top of Norris's head. All right. Beth, do you have the agenda handy by chance that you can drop in?
I can get to it, certainly.
Great. And then Norris or Beth, do you have a check-in question?
Go ahead, Norris. I've got my other duty here.
Good. Wait, no, you're on mute.
Well, I spent part of the morning with U.S. Senator, who is on the Senate Small Business Entrepreneurship Committee, and he they actually are interested. There is a chance in the next stimulus bill that there might be money that could be earmarked for ecosystem builders because our members have largely missed out on the prior rounds. But the House thinks that the money went to the right people. As opposed, we aren't the right people by inference. So I guess my question is, what is one thing that we can do to show visible, tangible progress of either ecosystem builders or ESHIP? Sorry, I didn't have a chance to make a shorter answer. So Peter's still going to pick on me.
I didn't pick on you last time. Somebody else
did, and that's okay.
On you,
Right.
I just simply said
we're all friends here.
Okay.
It's like, no, don't Peter, don't worry. No, I meant that positively.
That's fine. I'm not
So.
But anyway, so what could we? I'm sorry, I've been juggling some things here. Trying to get off a call, actually. So what's one thing that we can point to and say, we're making a difference? And I realize that could cover a lot of territory, but your mom calls and says, well, what have you got done?
Okay, first I'm gonna, Beth, I'm gonna make it the goal 7. The goal 7 agenda.
Oh, That's the one I got from your email this morning.
Oh, sorry. I don't know. We'll just make sure that we have the right one, and I apologize for any confusion. So okay. So Norris, you want to know what is the one thing that we can do?
That we can say that we have done that.
Okay.
What is it that we have put out in the world that shows the unique selling proposition, if you will, of ESHIP and/or ecosystem building? Because we can go both micro and macro.
Okay. Are you going to lead us off by answering that so that
Well, the person who goes first gets to say unsung heroes, so that would be unfair for me to do that. But I'll say the Unsung Heroes project has certainly got a lot of mileage, a lot of eyeballs on their offerings. So I will cheat and say that one.
Okay, great. Okay. Unsung
That's
heroes.
going. I wanted to say that. But
Norris, can I ask a qualifying question?
certainly.
Are we? What is the scope of your question? Are we talking about
Well, I was
things
thinking
we've done as the
intentionally.
ESHIP initiative with with one of the goals? We're talking about individually as ecosystem builders.
I was saying both, but
Okay.
but let's, okay, why don't we limit it to what can ESHIP point to is we did this.
Well, so the context of your question was to justify funding from a government angle, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so what is one thing the ESHIP community can point to that shows we have made progress? Is that right, Norris?
Yeah, close enough. I was hoping it might just, even if it triggers a tangent or two, that's okay. I'm just sort of.
You're talking about the professional?
That was the only question that came. That was the only question that came to mind when you threw it to me. So
are you talking about the professional field of ecosystem building as opposed to the practice of ecosystem building? Because I think that's one of the notions that we keep going back and forth about, and something that Christine and I are trying to flesh out in a blog post is people come with different perspectives. So there's the practice of ecosystem building, and there's the building the professional field of ecosystem building. One has accreditation, certification, validation, like a
I think you're over. I mean, I don't want us to overthink this. I was kind of hoping for the gut reaction, but I would say, what are we doing that would impress funding and sources of resources and funding entities? What have we done that we can say, here's something we've accomplished, and certainly that at the local level is fine, at the intergalactic level is fine, or anywhere in between. I didn't mean for this to be a hard question.
I'll give a gut reaction.
It's hard. Okay.
I think this might be similar. So I'm not super familiar with the Unsung Heroes project yet, but this may be kind of along the lines, but less formalized and less documented. I'll speak from a very personal experience. So over the last 6 years, I've led about 70 startup weekends in about 40 cities throughout the US, Canada, and Australia. And many of those have been, well, not many, but some of them have been repeat cities. And so I get to go into a place once a year. Usually I'm there for about a week, 4 times in a row over the course of 4 years, and check in with this community and see, where are you? And because I haven't been there, it's very obvious to me that they've made significant progress in some areas. And so I could pull out stories where I see this has happened as a direct result of the work that these people are doing regardless of whether they're professional or just practicing volunteers or in some other role in the ecosystem, I'm very aware of the effort and how it's having an impact. In the specific context of Startup Weekend, it's been just enough years now that we see significant results. And now I know on our project page for this goal, we say, you know, it can take up to 20 years to see results of ecosystem work in a region. But I have seen in just over the course of 3 years, I suppose three seems to be a pretty magical number for individual teams of people that come into the ecosystem's education channels and meet other would-be co-founders and attempt several projects, some of which become successful businesses. And I could pull out some very specific examples like Gainesville, Florida, where I think I've done 5 startup weekends, and they have struggled to do it consistently because of a lack of funding. But the little that they've been able to do through one nonprofit organization and a handful of community-led events have created really measurable results and sometimes with metrics that probably an economic development person would like to see, like number of jobs created, revenue, attracting talent to the region. I could probably identify between 5 and 10 companies that grew out of startup weekends in Gainesville, Florida, that employ anywhere from 10 to 100 people now.
Well, I really like this because the first startup weekend I was an organizer for was way back in the earliest days of it. I still think Mark Nugger went out and I went out, got a ton of burritos, and my car, I think 5 years later, still smelled like burritos. Boise's not a good example for them, but it all in the sense of a positive. But if we can, one, sort of write up these results. I know that back then there was this enthusiasm that they were going to chronicle all of this and keep track of all this, and both the positive and negative lessons. So I think that's a great project. I think, because I do think we can demonstrate. I mean, our first startup weekend was pretty good. Our second one was really bad, but we got 2 marriages out of it. I'm not sure that counts, but yeah, I think figuring out how can we can point to this, because you've got some great stories, and you also got some numbers. Okay, I like that.
Okay, let's let everybody else respond. Go ahead. I guess Michael, either call on somebody or Peter is going to go.
Let me
Peter, I call on Peter.
Okay, good.
Let me jump in real quick.
Peter.
If the point is to try to influence, so I gather the point is, how do we influence Congress in terms of additional resources to support entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ecosystems? And if that's the question, then a couple of things need to be answered. First, well, there's a tactical element, and there's a sort of a factual element. The tactical element is that it's important to identify who are the gatekeepers for this, and those will be members of the appropriate committees in the House and Senate, and both in terms of appropriation as well as substance, and then target the information that you have to those particular members, states, and districts. It doesn't help that if you're citing examples from Chicago, if nobody on the Appropriations Committee or on the Substantive Committee is either from Illinois or whose district includes Chicago. I mean, it just doesn't help. So you need to get that focused in terms of, here's examples in your states, in your districts where this made a difference. The second is, you know, if the Dems are saying this was covered in the first round of funding or the first couple rounds of funding, then it doesn't need to be covered in subsequent rounds. Then I think you have to be able to answer that question factually as to whether that's the case or not. And B, if it is the case but still missed some important groups, then that's something to be reckoned with. And so, for instance, if over the weekend I was talking to a friend of mine who's a member of Congress, and I told him that my thinking now has been in terms of the kinds of activities that we're proposing to get into in terms of entrepreneurship. Some of the proposals that we're putting out is the 15-minute commute rule. And the 15-minute commute rule is focusing on job creation, business creation that is within a 15-minute commute to where people live. And so if your target population are urban poor neighborhoods, then focusing entrepreneurial activities around neighborhoods that are within 15 or places that are with 15 minutes within that. And my argument is that it's both a feminist agenda in the sense that you're supporting, you're making accessible opportunities in job creation and business creation for people who often have other family responsibilities. And it would be useful for them to be able to be within 15 minutes of where they work and have the resources and services within an easy commute activity. But also I argue that this is a neighborhood building strategy, and it could also be rural areas as well. But it is, sort of the 15-minute concept in terms of travel time makes things accessible and builds on that. And he loved it. I mean, he just went crazy with the idea. So, so those are a couple of things that I think for that need to be done. But both in terms of tactics and who to target, and strategy in terms of what sorts of information you need to get out there. That's just
so that answers Norris's other extended question. I think the initial question, just for checking in, and I think we've gone past that, was
yep.
What do you see as one thing the ESHIP community can point to that shows we've made progress?
Right.
So, so what would you say?
Down the road.
Huh? I'm sorry.
And also perspectively.
No, to Peter, that our senator is actually that also would resonate with him. He is particularly thrilled at the near explosion of Latina entrepreneurship in Idaho. I mean, they were already strong,
yeah.
but
okay.
anyway. So the point of figuring out who the key. We know we have a pretty good, actually do have a pretty good idea who on the Senate side. The House side thinks we should give the money to universities and SBDCs. So that's a different question. But I love what I'm hearing so far. Yep, Beth is looking worried.
No, and Beth I don't know if we go back to answering the question, or if Peter could add some of whatever parts of what he said into the agenda so we could capture it on the document. That would be super helpful. Yeah. Beth, is there something that goes either to the original question about what can the ESHIP community point to, or to talk about how, and I think that what Peter and Norris are actually talking about are more of a universal support focused area as opposed to a sustainable work area.
It is about getting paid, ultimately.
Right. So let's complete one part
Beth
of the.
is dying to say something, I think.
What?
I can't tell. Look, whether you're eager to talk or eager to not talk. But you have that look.
I'm always eager to talk when I have something I think is important to say. Yeah, I was listening and thinking, okay, most of what we're talking about definitely aligns with goal 6. And I look forward to the new cadence, because 6 and 7 and 4 and storytelling, and they're all so important, and they're also related. Things that we can point to that show progress under sustainable work. We have a great book list. That's Project 7.6 that lives on the Ecosystem Builders Hub. The ecosystem training and certification is being worked on behind the scenes with some folks like Del Gines and the folks at SourceLink with the IEDC. The project 7.2, we have at least, because I was a co-author of it, one job description that is still awaiting feedback from others and recommended edits. We don't have an ecosystem builder job board that I know of yet. Peer support networks, I think, organically have been made great progress since the ESHIP Summit #1. And the folks that we've met and the folks that we've worked on things with or just gotten to know and shared, and friendships that have come of all of that. So I think from formal progress, NRPs, we're ready for you. Not quite there yet. But there's definitely been some progress towards, I would say, the majority of the things under sustainable work.
Hassan, do you have something that that you'd like to call out as something that we've been we can point to as having made some progress to increase support?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most important things, I mean, outside of the very specific tactical stuff, I think it's recognition of ecosystem building and ecosystem builders as a role within organizations. Because I think we all agreed that there were elements of things that people do within their job that are ecosystem building, but it wasn't recognized as a very specific role. And I think without it being recognized as a specific role, it's very easy for it to just splinter back out into whatever title or whatever area it fell under before. So I think I think the first step of just getting broader recognition for ecosystem building, because I think even in conversations that I have now with some of the cities that we're in and with traditional economic development folks, people are using language that I didn't hear them use before. People are talking about ecosystem builders as a role within their ecosystem. So, and I didn't see that before. It felt like, there was a group of people that knew, and that group of people was insular and a smaller group, but now it seems to have gone out to a wider audience. So I think if anything, in addition to all the other stuff, I think just the broader recognition of ecosystem building is a major step.
Great, thank you.
If I might ask, are they using the terms? I mean, here in the Northwest, it's become, it has starting to become a buzzword, but the people who are claiming to be ecosystem builders would not, they're not. I think, I don't know how to say it nicely, but they say, oh yeah, we're doing that. That's us. We know how to do that, even when they don't. But so do you see any substances, like, even if they're stealing, or if they may be stealing the term, but are they also stealing the tools? Because if they are integrating those tools, then that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversations that I've been in, it's, I mean, they're all formalized roles with very specific, it's a very specific role within the ecosystem, and I think it falls within the broader definition of how we define. I don't think I haven't come across people who are just taking a title and running away with the title and saying, I'm an ecosystem builder. It's basically people within an ecosystem that recognize there are all these things that we need to have done within our ecosystem. And if we have one person doing them, here's the title that they fall under, or taking someone who's already doing them and applying that title to them. Whereas before they may not have been called an ecosystem builder. But I think it's the same things that we all talk about.
So I think, so the thing that keeps coming up in conversations as we talk to wider audiences is that there is, and that's the topic conversation on for this call, is there's a practice of ecosystem building and there's a profession of ecosystem building, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. And I think what happens, and the challenge is, there's a notion that there are people who practice ecosystem building as kind of like a skill up or an additive to whatever roles they do. So they are educators, policymakers, librarians, you know, all those people that are already in the ecosystem that have other roles, but there's an additive thing that they do where they think about things on a holistic systems level thinking and mindful to be inclusive and all those things that we strive and identify as people who do this thing called ecosystem building. And then there's moving the professional field of ecosystem building, where the field is like 10 years ago, there wasn't such a thing called project management. Now there's a job description, accreditation, certification, all those things that Beth pointed to around sustainable work as a job title and a role. There are people who ecosystem build, and I think that's the tension and friction, is there are people who ecosystem build and they do other jobs, right? So there are economic development people, there are policymakers who think about things in the same way that many of us do. And we also call that ecosystem building. They will not have a title as an ecosystem builder, but ecosystem building will be something that they also do in addition to the other things. It's like a skill up, maybe, and you can get better at that and never be titled as the profession. So there are people who project manage, right? There's certification that you can get better at to be a better project manager. But there's also some of these certifications and things that you can do as a person that manages a project without ever getting all those letters behind your name. So you're not Six Sigma, you're not Scrum certified or whatever. You know how to do those things, but that doesn't necessitate you being able to. Is that resonating with anybody? And talking about the practice and the profession.
So here's I think I get where you're going with this, Celia. You know, I've talked about this previously too. I don't make the distinction between different kinds of roles that people play as it is the activity of ecosystem building and the profession of ecosystem building. So I'm not thinking of people who do certain things in the range of, quote, what we call ecosystem building. It's just, it's an activity. And how that activity plays out, it could be an organization that does it. It doesn't have to be an individual. And we see this in the real world in terms of people who want to, you know, I don't mean to trivialize ecosystem building, but somebody who wants to take a knitting, well, I'm going to start an accordion class. I'm not going to be an accordionist. Okay, I'm learning to play. I'm going to start a class next month on accordion. And so, you know, that's just an activity I'm going to participate in, and I'm going to hopefully enjoy it, and we'll go from there. You know, more serious in terms of, you know, kinds of stuff that people do. When I was legislative staffer, I never called myself an economic developer, but I wrote legislation dealing with economic development. And having the ability to be able to take side courses or other sorts of things that help me in that process is useful. The one, you know, I'm having flashbacks because, and I think I've talked about this too. For years, the workforce development field has wanted to professionalize workforce developers. And, you know, I was involved in building a promising practices site to help advance the profession of workforce development. I mean, this has been going on for at least 3 decades. Now, what they've done is, in the case of the workforce world, is that they have created an organization called National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. And so it is an organization that has the purpose of advancing the profession as well as the field. And so, and that's their focus. And so they provide continuing education units and other sorts of things. Now, they haven't gone into a credential. They've talked about that for a dozen years, at least. And I think they're still trying to decide that. IEDC's boost in this is a real help because they know how to do that sort of stuff in the entrepreneurship world. So, I mean, I think that, you know, that might be a pathway is, you know, creating, is there a professional association or an association of professionals that could emerge out of this? And it doesn't have to be a lobby group. It could just simply be a, you know, get together every year kind of group through, you know, either virtually or directly. But
That would be Startup Champions?
it could be something like that. Yep. Yep.
Well, I mean, but that's an existing group, a professional
Sure.
association of
Yep.
ecosystem builders, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And then that, but you know, the unless you're in the business, I'm not sure that people would say Startup Champions is the group.
right.
You know,
So,
there's a branding issue there, perhaps.
yeah. So I think that where Startup Champions is a peer recognized organization around people who look at ecosystem building as as part of what they do, or that they do ecosystem building
Right.
as part of their profession, whether they run an incubator, accelerator, co-working space, all of those programs, policies, and other efforts. But you're right. There's not necessarily policymakers that see themselves as a startup champion, not because they don't necessarily focus on startups per se, although they help ecosystems because of what they do.
Yeah. Now I'm a little bit. Please forgive me for appropriating somebody else's idea here, but we, in the context of a discussion a couple of weeks ago about Black Lives Matter, and it was a group of African American activists in their communities and so forth, and they were arguing that they want accomplices as well as allies. And to me, it's an interesting distinction. I'm not, and I really don't want to get into cultural appropriation here, but the idea of, you know, the people who are engaged in some aspect of ecosystem building, consider them as an ally, and those people who are part of the profession are the accomplices.
That's a really interesting perspective. Will you share that again for Mark, who just joined us, because I think it's a really pertinent. We're talking about the profession of ecosystem builder versus the practice of ecosystem building.
Great,
And,
I just in time. That's why I dialed in late, even though I was on another call. I was gonna
Great,
blow you
so-
guys off, but this is a topic I care about, so let's do it.
well,
So-
I'm glad that you do. But so Peter's sharing something that I wanted you to hear, and I'm curious to get your input on, as well as everybody else's.
Well, this is kind of a double duty for Mark because he knows where I'm coming from on this. So one of our day after conversations, Mark, I think it was the Urban League one, which I owe you the notes on. I'll send those to you today. It was interesting that the conversation switched to, you know, there were lots of allies out there marching on Black Lives Matter. And then one guy said, well, we're not looking for allies, we're looking for accomplices. And again, I don't want to appropriate the cultural meaning of that for this group, but, you know, I said that to me is the difference between an ecosystem builder who, you know, who's part of the profession, those are the accomplices, and those who participate in one fashion or another because they support activities that lead to entrepreneurship and the building of ecosystems, but aren't actively engaged in the profession of it. Those are allies. And allies could be legislators, they could be, you know, public policy makers, they could be foundations, whatever, but they're not necessarily the people on the front line. So with hope that I will be forgiven by the National Urban League people about using their phrase in this context. It just strikes me that that's an interesting distinction that resonates with me in this context as well. Mark and I have been talking about a day after conversation in Prince George's. That's why the relationship there. But go ahead.
I like the analogy because I think the analogy translates well into what we talk about. I like the idea that that it's not a good or bad thing, or this is better than. It's just different, right? And I think that there's a propensity to, depending on the lens that you look at, to judge. This is good, this is not good, you're good at it, you don't do it, you know, that kind of thing. Hassan, I'm curious to hear, especially from somebody who works in an organization like yours, because people come at this work through different lenses and trying to align that.
Well, I just want to say, because we're talking about sustainability, it's almost like there's two very distinct um, approaches that have two things that have to be directly approached, basically. So there's the piece about getting funding for ecosystem builders. So to fund ecosystem builders work, so to fund positions within organizations or within city government or um, state government. So there's that piece, the funding piece, but there's also the piece about getting people who potentially are doing ecosystem building but aren't aware of the field and aren't aware of the title of ecosystem building. And I say this because um, I'm currently recruiting like for the last 2 months for a couple of different positions. And I've noticed that there are people who really qualify for the jobs, but never start looking or applying because the title is ecosystem builder, and they don't recognize that that's something when they're doing their searches for jobs, when they're looking, they don't recognize that as something that they do. So it almost feels like they're, and I'm not sure if this is part of the campaign, the awareness campaign, but there's like two distinct tracks. One, awareness for people who have the funds who fund these positions, and awareness for people who potentially could be doing the work or are doing the work, because you have to have both at the same time. Because once you get all of the funding, if you don't have, I mean, once we all are no longer doing this, to get to a point where we're not doing this, there has to be the next generation of people who are doing this. And unless people are aware of that, it has to be like both the funding and the training piece have to go hand in hand. I was thinking about something because I worked years ago. I worked in workforce development, and there was a certification, and it was funded through. And I'm wondering if there's a similar way of doing it, because through Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the state's economic development arm, there was funding in partnership with Michigan State University to provide training to people who were working in workforce development, who were primarily serving the needs of companies and employers. And they created a certification called the Business Solutions Professional Certification. And it was funded through the economic development arm of the state in partnership with Michigan State University. But it was a process. And I think, and the reason I say this is because you could come up with a certification that some national organization creates, but unless it's recognized locally, people aren't going to adopt it or see any significance in having that certification unless it's a body that's recognized by, whether it's local or on a state level.
Well, so here's the conundrum. And so I was around when those things were being talked about and done. One of the issues that kept coming up with respect to workforce world is, okay, you get a credential. What does that mean? Does that mean that workforce boards are going to only hire people who have the credential? Or does that mean that they get an automatic boost in pay if they have the credential? So even the existence of the credentials, and Michigan is probably one of the most more advanced workforce systems in this country in terms of the professionalization of because a lot of it came from a lot of the whole idea of the professionalization of the field came out of Michigan, to the Michigan workforce development system. So Michigan Works. So it, but even there, so far as I know, you're not required to be a workforce professional in order to be hired as a director of a workforce board.
No, you're not. But Peter, I mean, I can tell you there was, and I saw it directly in all the job postings that started to pop up after that. There was a bump in pay if you had that certification. Good. And there were job postings that clearly required you to have that certification. and I wouldn't say it's across the board where every job in workforce development requires you to have that certification. But if you were working for if you're working for any of the Michigan Works offices, you had to have that certification. If you were working for the workforce development arm of the city of Detroit or any of the larger cities, you had to have that certification.
But the other piece of it though is that, which is different than here, is there's money. I mean, there's federal money that goes through the state. You know, the state money, you know, has the plans with the local workforce boards. There's the, you know, that rolls into the state plan that goes to the feds. I mean, there is, and then Michigan's one of the few states that actually puts some state tax dollars into the workforce system as well. So they all have skin in the game in order to make sure that in order to be able to drive home the point, there needs to be a credential at the local level to be able to do stuff. And we don't have that with respect to the entrepreneurship area. The other thing, and I don't mean again to sound like I'm being a goof on this, but entrepreneurial ecosystem builder is 12 syllables. I mean, get that out multiple times, and you know, you just people just start to zone out. So I think that we even have a problem here in terms of just being able to consolidate the concept into something that may be fewer than 12 syllables. And how to get that across, because people hear ecosystem and they start thinking of, well, if it's Victor, they will start thinking of rainforest, but in this case, other the ones that they're in the Amazon. So, sorry, I'm going off here, but
I think you're spot on. Go ahead, Hassan.
No, I mean I agree with what Peter was saying. State of Michigan in this, I mean, there was a lot of funding pumped into that program, and the workforce development system is pretty well advanced. I think the person that was running, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but I think she went on to work in the federal government in the labor department because of the work that she did.
Yeah, Christine Quinn, who unfortunately
exactly.
she just passed away suddenly.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So
and I want to make sure that Beth gets a chance to chime in. So in hearing what Hassan and Peter were talking about, it sounds like a chicken and egg problem, right? How do we amplify and strengthen the need and the impact and the importance of ecosystem building to get funding behind why this matters, and then funding behind this in order to put this accreditation certification stuff forward. So it becomes chicken and egg. I think the challenge is but here's the positive part, is that we're not the first thing to come along that seeks this, right? So maybe what it is trying to see how those things evolve, like a Six Sigma, belt thing. How did you get that momentum to spike and become a thing? And I think
so,
that's,
so sorry to jump in, but a little more history. So a lot of this is driven by the feds. And now be careful what you ask for, because when the feds jumped into the workforce world with both feet and started really driving the process, I'd say all but about 4 or 5 states defunded or ended funding that they put in directly through state revenues into their workforce systems. And like I said, Michigan's an exception, Minnesota's one, California, and there are probably 2 or 3 others that continue to fund workforce out of general revenue funds. But everybody else just basically ceded it over to the feds because the legislatures are looking at this and saying, look, well, if the feds are going to pay for this, we don't need to. And so but back in the 90s, Baldrige was big with the workforce system, and they had an initiative called the Workforce Excellence Program. And they put out books after books after books about how to build effective workforce boards, how to do effective workforce engagements, how to involve employers. I mean, it was a huge business through the 90s and into the early 2000s. And it was all built around Baldrige.
you know, and Six Sigma, by the way, is Motorola, but Baldrige is the, you know, sort of the public domain, and that's how you ended up with the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships Program. Again, that was all Baldrige driven. So so these things, but in this case, the feds were really pushing out this idea of excellence in the system, workforce board excellence, staff excellence, and so forth. And what evolved after this was then a pattern of other activities. But the Fed's motivation was to make sure the dollars were spent well. And so it wasn't really chicken and egg in this case. In that case, it was directed. And a few states like Michigan sort of picked up on it. But it's you know, it even with that force, it hasn't really seeped throughout the entire system on the one hand, and then secondly, what ended up happening is the states gave up their role in the workforce system other than to pass the federal money along.
So what I'm hearing sounds like this 12-syllable term is a potential barrier, but all along, I've always seen ecosystem building as not much different than collective impact. Backbone support functions. So maybe we aren't communicating clearly enough or raising awareness enough of this model already exists and is very well respected, and it's what ecosystem building is.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. But I think what I would add to, again, the word ecosystem is overused. I don't even use it when talking about this work unless I'm talking to you guys, right? But back to what the point Hassan was making, right? Ecosystem building work in traditional sense shows up in system integration opportunities. It shows up in business development roles. It shows up in all these other areas so that people that are back to the whole idea of practice versus profession, people that are in the profession actually doing it don't recognize it, right? So there's a language thing there, but also for me, a lot of the conversations I've been having specifically around the profession, I don't know if, and this is just my view, right? And you guys can shoot me down, but I see it more like software development, right? You're not going to be able to normalize it or get a certification in it because it looks different. But I know if I'm a software developer, I get known by the amount of code I have published in GitHub, by the amount of things that I've done and the projects I've worked on. So I don't know if there's going to be a standardization, some sort of certification that comes to it, because there's just no one way to, you know, look at these system level projects, right? So that being the case, it goes back to the whole idea of from sustainability. And I've been, again, I owe you guys a Slack post. I still work on it. Ecosystem builders get paid different ways. The only ways that are certain right now are ecosystem, and this is just my view again, that are tied to some sort of grant where it's actually called out, or tied to some sort of incubation or real estate project, or some sort of workforce talent or education project. So those are the only three ways that we currently get, you know, we see normal patterns of how there's this thing, there's someone that's looking across the system, that's filling in gaps, there's a role, here's some hours, and here's a budget for that, right? Other than that, it's free for all, right? So I think the whole idea around this whole syllable thing, like when we see ecosystems, especially when I use it, right, are you talking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem or you talking about the innovation ecosystem, right? So, and that all gets blurred. So I will close to say that it's still going to be organic. It is, I don't think it's a chicken and egg. It's like, it's the meal, right? And you don't know, you just don't know how it gets there. And you got to try to put it in this chicken or egg construct when it's something extremely different. So I don't think you can standardize it. It's only going to be on, you performed in the role, here's your projects, here's your past performance, or there's something that you contributed from a thought leadership perspective to the community of practice.
I think it can be standardized from the systems perspective when an organization or a function is in place to help ensure that the ecosystem support organizations and are optimized and getting entrepreneurs what they need when they need it, and that the bringing the ecosystem actors together to say, what are we missing here? What are the entrepreneurs telling us? How do we fill this gap? Who is best equipped in this ecosystem to fill the gap? How do we get the resources to make that happen? That to me can be standardized because it is that collective impact backbone support for the ecosystem as a whole. From an ecosystem building within an entrepreneurial support organization, I think you're right, because there are just a million different things that count as ecosystem building in many, many roles.
I think the challenge that I see then it becomes when we measure the impact in a community, we tend to equate some of the factors to be the same or measure them in the same way, and knowing that, you know, depending on the community, depending on the elements of the community, that looks very different. So everybody, a large number of organizations want to support high-tech, high-growth startups. So that's where the energy and the momentum is. If you have a lot of Main Street businesses and less high-tech, high-growth, then your ecosystem doesn't seem, according to the media, as vibrant, right? Even though you've got wealth creation happening, there's job creation happening, there's momentum happening around starting, but it's not gauged in that hierarchy, because I know that, you know, I sit on the Oklahoma Venture Advisory. They they defined venture as a high-tech, high-growth, scalable thing. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily all that I support. So are you telling me that the other stuff doesn't take precedence? It's not something that we put energy behind. So what does that entail? Like, I don't, so is that a loss for people that they're not putting energy towards high tech, high growth? And if that's the only flavor of entrepreneurship that we're supporting, then you're going to lose a lot of people, not only the ones that are already existing, but people that work in high tech, high growth startups don't necessarily want to just be in an environment that are filled with high tech, high growth startups. They have to, you know, they want to listen to different kinds of music. They want to go eat at different places. So all that vibrancy happens through a variety of causes, right? So anyway, that's my frustration when it's one flavor, and this is denoted as like the thing.
Right, and I think that goes back to the language part of it too, because almost, if we weren't in the pandemic, I probably would have been in a fist fight last Friday talking about the difference between entrepreneur and small business, right? So I can tell you there are high growth. So take out the tech piece of it. There are high growth businesses that are not tech based, right? And you need all of them. So and then we use terms interchangeably. So we were having a discussion and we're using the word entrepreneur and small business interchangeably, almost diminishing the small business side of the conversation. And I was like, wait, no, entrepreneurs start small businesses, and they were trying to give me, well, entrepreneur, the venture backed, high tech. They were trying to do that. I was like, no, that's not necessarily correct. It's like businesses start small, they grow, they scale, they get resources,
Right.
get from small to large. So yeah, that is a frustration. But the folks that you're talking to are always trying to put things in buckets because they're hearing a lot of information at them. So when you talk about these ESHIP systems, right? So there's these small business development infrastructures, because back to what Peter was saying, government got involved and things like that, but there's no sort of true core entrepreneur level infrastructure that can support folks that might need some resources, that might just need some customers, and might just need to locate in a place with other people. But I don't know how we solve that, right? I think that's what we're trying to do here, but it's still a language thing to me.
So there's that 5X group.
Mark, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, Mark, if that's all it takes to get you into a fight with you, I'm not going to a bar.
So I know there's a 5X group that's working on definitions. They're engaging with some of the other people around other project goals, which is another reason that these goal calls are kind of evolving into some conversations where we can have cross-goal conversations and overlap, and because it's all interdependent. But the interesting thing is I introduced somebody at Gen One of the people that was speaking at the Global Entrepreneurship World Cup thing was talking about their definition of entrepreneur and how that was different. Like they were a disruptor. They took on something new, as opposed to somebody who's opening up a dry cleaner isn't trying out a new thing. So there's a level of risk. And the people on the 5X group were saying, well, I don't know, there is a risk level to entrepreneurship that they're seeing. But I'm going to invite a different conversation. I think that maybe ecosystem building isn't necessarily contingent on trying to identify the entrepreneur as opposed to identifying the system. We're ecosystem builders. Some of us do support entrepreneurs and small businesses, and some support economic development and all of that. I think what ecosystem builders do for the most part is support the conditions in which people can thrive. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be new at this or you have to be a 1 to 5 year business. If I'm ecosystem building, I'm actually connecting and helping a community thrive, regardless of the age of your business, the number of people that you employ or are engaged in your business. It's about the community, not necessarily about the individuals. So I don't know if that resonates. Then we don't get hung up in who's an entrepreneur, who's a small business, who do I support, how do I help? It's really about the systems.
Well, I would point out that there's an opportunity here to make the case that, you know, it's not just what they now officially called quality ventures, but that quality entrepreneurship is the kind of thing that makes VCs and angels' hearts go pity pat. And they've claimed there's some evidence that that's where not only you should get the bulk of the support, it should get all of the support. That making the case for small business in general is something that it's one arena where we have a chance to make a difference, because everybody's on the unicorn bandwagon. I suspect here in the Northwest we got our zebras, and that's catching, you know, some fire. But figuring out what it's definitely, I think there's some real opportunities for us to demonstrate our value on multiple fronts. The feedback I'm getting on 5.X from policymakers, not just academics, has been universally positive. I was quite shocked that you know, even people who I would have expected to think we were being cheeky, we're not. So that was, and part of it is because CJ Cornell just did a total kick-ass job on that. So I don't know that's going to lead to our getting paid directly, but you know, there's always, hope springs eternal. Anyway, Mark, glad to see you.
Yep.
I'll still stay away from you in bars, but.
Nah, it was just a heated discussion.
Dude, you can have one. You can have one free punch anyway. Hopefully, it's a rum punch.
Right.
So Beth.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You don't want to chime in?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, this was interesting because I'm sitting here listening to everybody and the conversation we're having today. It kind of feels like we had this conversation 4 years ago, and it's not a bad thing. We need to continue having these conversations. And I remember when I was doing our micro global awareness campaign here in the region, I felt like I was being condescending by continuing to tell the story over and over and over again. But people don't see it that way because they don't hear everything you're saying, and they have to hear it several times before it's internalized. So I think just in that, with the theme of this call, it's a reminder of that we just need to continue educating and finding ways to demonstrate why we need to be resourced sustainably.
That sounds good. Michael, do you have a parting thought or two before we wrap?
Not really. I've been racking my brain for more language to use. Things that you guys have been wrestling with for the last half hour have eluded me. In Queensland, Australia, the work was often called in the community innovation support work, or something even more broad. And I haven't come up with anything, but I think what I'm hearing in general from everyone is that if we strive for new language, we should make it something that is useful to all of the stakeholders. I hear people come in from different perspectives saying, oh, that doesn't really work for these people, or that doesn't really work for this stakeholder or the government or something. And I think it would be useful to explore that specifically from each stakeholder's perspective individually, and see what comes out of 7 different exercises, and then see what they all roll up to, rather than take going from the top back and saying, okay, we are the ecosystem builders, what words are meaningful to us, and then working in that direction.
I hear you. I think what I feel like is being pointed out is, this is a year where we put a stake in the ground and say, this is something. Like, we can't just keep bouncing these terms around. Is it ecosystem builder? Is it ecosystem developer? Is it this? Is it that? Ecosystem builder has traction. So I think for me, it's redefining ecosystem builder to talk about the systems, like I said, as opposed to haggling over who's an entrepreneur, who's a small business person, who am I supporting. The other thing is, builders to me are people that take resources and do with it what you can, and then find more resources. So maybe it's shoring up a wall, maybe it's building a scaffold, maybe it's fixing something that's broken. But whatever builders do, that's what I feel like I'm doing in the community. And so I'm going to take that and run with it, and put my stake in the ground there, because I don't want to go through another, as Beth pointed out, we don't have the time or the energy or the inclination to talk about this, to haggle over the wordsmithing. It's a lot, and we've got several hundred people that have been thinking about this for a long time now, and it's time to put stuff out there and get more input, but not necessarily to wordsmith it. So that's a lot of the shared vision work around Goal 3. And we're hoping that at the ESHIP Summit coming up, which I hope all of you are registered at, and is around, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to post in Slack and the Facebook group a marketing kit. So what we've heard from all of you, or many of you, is that if you could share what this thing is in a way to invite other people to come, that's what you need. And to make it simpler, we've created a marketing kit where you can tweet or post or whatever about the ESHIP Summit on your personal channels, or send it off in an email. That would be easier than having you have to create an explanation of what ESHIP is. It's shareable links and all kinds of stuff. So I will post it in Slack. I will post it in Facebook. Just a show of hands, did anyone receive that email on Friday from the foundation that said, here's recruit a team to come, or talking about the group discount?
We're
Anybody?
already bringing a delegation from the Gem State.
Yeah, no, I'm asking whether or not you received an email
Yes.
from the foundation on Friday.
Yes,
I didn't
That's
get one.
from Unity.
Okay, so some did, some didn't. Raise your hand if you did receive it. Okay, all right, that helps. Okay, all right. we will get you the information, Beth. So it'll be in Slack. It'll be on Facebook. All right. I'm going to wish you all a great day. ESHIP champions, I will talk to you on Thursday. We're going to talk about the new cadence of calls. And I hope everybody has a good, productive week. Thank you.
Right, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.